And then there were 27. More roster cuts have been made, which lead us into the final rounds of roster cuts coming up here on Locked On Flames.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, cBelmosto, and thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to talk about some questions ahead of the season, along with what it's going to take to make the final cut, and who was sent down to the AHL today, whether it was reassignment or waivers. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your Calgary Flames every day. And let's jump right into this because we are truly in the home stretch of the preseason, and it feels so good to finally be here. I feel like we waited all summer just to get crumbs of Flames content or see what they were up to this off season, and just to be on the cusp of the regular season that is going to determine the future of the organization. Feels so good. Are they going to be a good team? Are they going to be a bad team? Who knows? They'll probably end up in the soggy middle like always. But let's talk about these players that were reassigned to the Wranglers today. They reassigned 7 players. These players are waiver exempt. So it's Hunter Bristowich, Nick Cechek, Artem Grishnikov, William Stromgren, Sam Honzik, Adar Suniev, and Owen Say. The first thing I thought when I saw this list was, Sam Honzik really didn't impress anyone this preseason. I thought that this was going to be his year. I thought, him coming into camp all confident with gaining the 15 pounds was going to add a little more to his game, and he would feel more confident and move a little better and just have more confidence in himself. And unfortunately, there was none of that. And it's just kind of disappointing because, granted, it's the preseason. So much can happen between now and a potential call-up that I'm just kind of like, well, anything's possible. But I think that coming out of the gate like that, you fall kind of flat. And that's not the impression you want to make, especially given the, I don't want to say stigma, but perception around you as a player and your NHL potential, having a tough NHL camp and then being reassigned to the AHL might hurt your cause a little bit. And I mean, there was no shot that Adar Suniev was going to make this roster, especially I think with Griden kind of coming out, being the dark horse of camp. There wasn't a chance. He had a solid camp. Do not get me wrong. I don't think that he necessarily was horrible, but I do think that there's room for improvement, and that's fine. That's fine. However, let's get there because I feel like he's right on that cusp. One strong season in the AHL might change some things for him. But they placed 7 players on waivers today. Or that's a lie. They didn't place 7 players on waivers. They reassigned 7 players. They had Sam Morton, Dryden Hunt, Clark Bishop, and Yan Kuznetsov on waivers. That's 4, in case you can't count like me. Clark Bishop is obviously the captain of the Wranglers, so it makes sense. And much respect to him, but I don't think that he is necessarily on anyone's radar. I could see Dryden Hunt being on people's radar. especially with the progress he's made as a depth player and kind of a in-betweener since coming to Calgary. I could definitely see him being on someone's radar, and which honestly would probably go over really well for a lot of the kids that are like in the wings waiting. Sam Morton, I mean, someone might want to add him to their farm system and think that they can kind of bolster him. He's a good center, but I just don't see him, again, just with the log jam, the amount of forwards and talented centers that the Flames have. I don't see him making the cut for that. And Yan Kuznetsov would be a great 6th or 7th defenseman for most teams. I don't think he's going to be on anyone's radar, not because he's bad, but because a lot of players or teams have already established that role. So I think that if this was potentially like a January or February thing, we might be looking at something a little different. But out of all of these players, I would say that Dryden Hunt is the most likely to get claimed. But last season, I also said that Jacob Pelletier was most likely to be claimed, and Cole Schwinn ended up being claimed. So you never know. It's great to see these players, put up a strong training camp. They'll go on to, as long as they clear, they'll go on to Wranglers camp and hopefully really give the Wranglers what they're looking for, because ultimately what you do in the AHL is going to determine how the Flames use you and what your ceiling is, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about the remaining players, some practice lines, as well as chemistry coming up next here on Locked On Flames. And I couldn't be more excited to just be getting the season on the road. We have had a very long off season. The Flames have not played competitive hockey since April 17th. And if you're listening on the day this episode drops, it is September 30th. So we are absolutely struggling. And I'm looking forward to having the Flames back on the ice, as well as the Wranglers. But coming up next, we will chat about the lines, some power play shakeups, Rory Kerins sticking around, as well as Zayne Parekh's likelihood of making the NHL roster. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I am a sucker for a same game parlay because they are fun. They add a little more excitement to the game, whether it's your favorite team or just one that you're watching on TV because there is nothing else on. And you can have player props, you have same game parlays, as I mentioned, and of course, you can get in on the live action, and it's super easy to use and super easy to navigate. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at cBelmosto. So one of, I guess, two of the players that were not reassigned or placed on waivers today, Matvei Griden, who scored 2 goals in the game, the only 2 goals against the Seattle Kraken, and Rory Kerins. Rory Kerins sticking around and making Ryan Huska's job more difficult than it he may have thought it was going to be, is my kind of revenge. Obviously, with Kerins, he was up for 5 games and had 4 points. And then they were like, we'll reassign you to the Wranglers. And it didn't make sense. So for him to be getting an extended look makes me so happy because I was not sure how this was going to go. I think if they place him on waivers, they might be in trouble. I do. I think that especially if he gets in a few more NHL games, he might be the guy that people are calling about. Claiming, I guess, on waivers. No one's calling you. But it's a risk that I don't know if the Flames should take. And Griden is another player that I had him as my dark horse of the preseason and camp because he had a solid rookie showcase. But I feel like there's always like that one player that's kind of on your radar that just fully takes you by surprise. And he's been that guy. So I love it. I think, again, it's a tough decision because the Flames have way too many forwards. I love Joel Farabee. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. And same with Yegor Sharangovich. I love Legos. I'm looking at the sunflower Legos that I built right now. But to me, those are 2 other players that are taking up like $9 million in cap space, which like that's a chunk of change, but I'm not really worried about that. I'm worried about the missed opportunity for these young players because of the surplus of forwards. We talked about it yesterday, but like Ryan Lomberg, Justin Kirkland, like those guys are strictly for vibes. I'm sure they are nice people. It is nothing personal. This is just roster construction talk. There's just too many forwards. The Flames could very well trade. I mean, I would assume they would trade Sharangovich before they would try to trade Farabee. But you could trade Lomberg back to Florida, or you could shove Justin Kirkland on waivers. Sorry. But Rory Kerins deserves that 4th line spot. And Griden should have a solid look at the NHL too, I would say. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this roster isn't essentially the same roster as it was last April. But things have to change if this team expects to take the next steps, whether it be for the good or the bad. But let's talk about some of these practice lines because I am certainly intrigued. You have Farabee, Kadri, and Sharangovich. Huberdeau, and this is not, I don't believe that this is like a depth, like what, actually, yeah, it probably could be what you would see. But Farabee, Kadri, Sharangovich. Okay. Huberdeau, Frost, and Coronado. All right. Griden, Backlund, and Coleman as your 3rd line. Zary, Kerins, and Pospisil. And your 5th line is Lomberg, Kirkland, and Klapka. All right, before we look at defensive pairings, let's talk about this. Can we stop putting young players on the Backlund and Coleman line? It was fine in like 2021, 22. 23 was probably like pushing it. But we need to move on. Number 1, you're never going to recreate the magic that you had with Mangiapane there that one season. Number 2, why you like love the captain, love Blake Coleman, but they're old. They're older. Why are you stapling a young player to this line that has far too much talent and speed to be on this line? It does not make sense to me. But again, I am not a general manager. I look at this from the outside and say these. Maybe if I'm in the Saddle Dome in my little office like Craig Conroy or behind the bench like Huska, maybe my decisions are different. Maybe my perspective is different, but I don't get it. Also, Zayne, Kerins, and Pospisil that would be an interesting line. I think I like this. I think that Zayne and Pospisil have solid chemistry. I'm still kind of convinced that Kadri carried Pospisil in his rookie season, but I think that could be a good line. Skilled, fast, edgy. I'm here for it. And then you have your defensive pairings, which are Hanley and Uyghur, Ball and Anderson, Parekh and Pahal, and your extra defensemen are Bean and Solo. Your goalies were Cooley and Prosvetov. I love the idea of Mackenzie Uyghur being your top defenseman, your top pair. However, I wish it was Ball and Uyghur. Extending Hanley makes very little sense to me, but whatever. I get it. I would much rather have Hanley in the lineup over a guy like Jake Bean. So I think that he's more skilled, but at the end of the day, you should probably start working on integrating some youth a little bit. I do think that we'll see Ball and Uyghur once Anderson is traded. I like the idea of Parekh and Pahal together to start the year. I do. I think that putting him out there in a sheltered and limited role to start is great. That makes sense to me. I don't have an issue with it. But where I will have an issue with it is if we're seeing players like Jake Bean or Solo or Kuznetsov or, even Hanley playing high in the lineup over Parekh. Should Parekh be exhibiting, true NHL talent. And then the power plays I want to talk about, or power play units, I want to talk about those real quick because this tickled me pink. This made me feel very excited. It made me feel a lot of things. First power play unit is Kadri, Coronado, Frost, Huberdeau, and Uyghur. Am I a bad person for saying I think we need to do something about Huberdeau on the power play? I don't know. He actually had a decent time on the power play last year, but okay. I think we may need to change that. And then your second power play unit is Zayne, Rory Kerins, Sharon Govich, Parekh, and Anderson. I think that the second power play unit could be shaken up a little bit, mainly Sharon Govich and Anderson, but I mean, I get why it is the way it is. And quite frankly, I cannot wait until Zayne Parekh is quarterbacking the power play. I think that it's very stubborn of the Flames to not put him on the top power play unit. Love Parekh. He just has a lot to prove, and I'm looking forward to it because I think that there's something about spite pushes people. And I think Parekh has been doubted time and time again throughout his career, similar to Dustin Wolf, that it just fuels you. You love proving people wrong, that it just kind of becomes second nature. So I look forward to seeing this. I actually, when I saw that Kerins was on the second power play unit, I was like, okay, this is legit. I kind of thought that they would put maybe Griden on the power play. Maybe. But that's okay. I'm not going to sit here and overanalyze everything because I'll just be grateful for the steps forward that we're making ahead of the season. But coming up next, we're going to talk about some questions that I have, or I guess some light predictions, because the Flames always leave me with questions. I get answers, but then I'm left with more questions. So I'm going to talk about some chemistry along with Rory Kerins coming up next here on Locked On Flames. Thanks everyone for hanging out with me today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at cBelmosto, and you're following the show wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, because we are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your Calgary Flames every day. And let's talk about it. Because looking at this group, it is essentially the same roster as last year. Kirkland's back from his ACL injury. Anthony Mantha, I think he's a Penguin. So he's gone. Both suffered relatively close ACL injuries, which was kind of strange. It's a freak coincidence. But you are essentially running with the same roster. And we saw what this team could and couldn't accomplish last year. It took a lot for them to score more than 3 goals in a game. It was not not that it wasn't easy. It just did not come naturally like you would see from other teams. So I want to see the chemistry between Huberdeau, Coronado, and Frost. I think that this is going to be something to keep on your radar, just because Coronado and Frost are very young players that have solid skills. And then, of course, Jonathan Huberdeau has talent. Obviously, it's not Florida Panthers Huberdeau talent, but the chemistry there between Coronado and Frost, or Coronado and Huberdeau last year, I really liked. I think that Coronado may hit 30 goals a lot easier this year if he has a guy like Frost centering, because Frost likes to pass. So I like that. I want to see how the chemistry continues and how well things work with Frost down the middle at, as the season continues. Last season, all I could think, or when I was like putting these questions together, I was thinking about last season a lot, because what could they do differently? What similarities are these teams drawing to each other? What are the parallels? And I want to see how quickly we see players get called up, because obviously last year Hanzik and Coronado started the season with the team. Coronado was scratched. Didn't play until like the 3rd or 4th game of the season, and then was sent down after struggling a bit. Sam Hanzik had no points through 5 games and was reassigned. And then we saw Coronado called back up shortly thereafter, and he got the jump start he needed. And could we see that with another player this year? I don't necessarily think it's going to be Sam Hanzik. I think that he is one of the players that are on the cusp of being called up. But I do think that there are players, like, let's say Griden doesn't make the NHL roster. I think Griden would get a call up before Hanzik, in my opinion. Who is going to be the odd man out? We talked about this all summer long. There are far too many players on this team and not enough open spots. They have a plethora of forwards, and they need to figure out what to do with it. So instead of forcing your players to go back to the AHL where, they're probably like maxed out, trade someone, waive someone, let them play in the NHL. I get it. It's a lot easier said than done, but like with your defensemen, I think it's a lot easier than your forward group. Jake Bean and Miramonov. Truthfully, I have not seen much about Miramonov this preseason, so I don't really know what's cooking there. I think that they should put him on waivers. Quite frankly, I think that could be helpful. I mentioned it yesterday, and I wrote an article about it for the Win column about Pospisil kind of being like an odd man out. I don't think that they sit him or anything like that, but he's kind of just been on the outside. He just has not looked up to par as these other players. And that's a cause for concern for many reasons, but especially because you just signed him to a 3-year extension. So what is the plan there? Because you might be getting yourself into a little bit of trouble. And then my favorite part that I hope we see happen is Rory Kerins' final push to the opening night roster. He is one talented guy, and he has worked very hard. He's been grinding. His development was obviously impacted by COVID and the shutdown and, different regulations and limited ice time. And just to see a player that's been hungry get fed and rewarded a little bit, especially like this, like being up here at the 11th hour, I think it's a good sign. It is a very good sign, and I'm hopeful that the Flames figure something out and are able to have him in the lineup. He has a fair amount of skill that I think would be an upgrade over the fourth line. And I think you could even potentially put him as a third line center and swap back into the fourth line. Griden, same thing. He can get reassigned to the Wranglers, but I'm very hopeful. And I hope that the Flames make tough decisions in terms of moving players out to move players within their organization up and in. But that'll do it for me here on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Thank you all so much for joining me. The month of September is over, which means we are officially in hockey month. It's not spooky season. It's hockey season. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. Your Calgary Flames every day. And I will be back tomorrow with any updates, news, and hopefully a Rasmus Anderson trade.